All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for taking the time. Ms. Contra will call this meeting to order at 5 p.m. straight up. Mr. Molino, you want to lead us in the pledge and our moment of silence this evening? Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. All right. Well, it's great to see everybody. Miss Aria, a year older. Congratulations.
Just older. Wow.
Sorry, I don't know. That's years, I don't know, more smart, more wisdom. Yeah, there you go. All right.
Over 25. That's what we're going for.
That's right. That's right. All right. So we have a few items on our agenda in this study session. 3.1, repurposing update. Dr. Reynolds, do you want to give us a little briefing on kind of frame that? Or?
Appreciate that, President Sandoval, Governing Board, Cabinet, and guests. Welcome to this evening's study session. We do have a robust agenda that I will work hard to keep us moving through in an effective and efficient way, as well as making sure that we get you all the information that we have for you this evening. So we're going to start off with a repurposing update. So as the board knows, we started this work, and Mr. Molino will review some of that, but we started this work several years ago, and just as we're reviewing our current situation, we've got some new information that may impact the steps we take to move forward, but I'll let Mr. Molino kick us off and walk us through some of that information.
And Mr. Molino, real quick, if I could, please, I just want to make sure that everybody's aware that Representative Pingarelli and Dr. Sorensen will not be joining us this evening, so it'll just be myself, Ms. Underhill, and Ms. Hill. Thank you, sir.
President Sandoval, members of the Governing Board, Dr. Reynolds, Cabinet, and guests. Tonight, administration will be giving an update on the facilities master planning program as it pertains to the school closure and repurposing of the 3 potential school sites. Eight formal updates to the Governing Board, and we are at the cusp of entering Phase 4. We mentioned during the retreat that we were starting Phase 4, and we kind of put a pause after the retreat in regards to timing and when actually to start the process, and I will explain why in a little bit. But the main thing that we continue to hear from staff and the communities is their desire to know the timeline and the outcome. We have been taking a very slow, methodical process to make sure that we do our due diligence and due care over the last 3 years to get here. But that is the staff's and both communities' main desire is what is the outcome? They have a concern, but they really want to know what is the outcome, when are we going to get there, when are we going to know? For Phase 4, these are the possible outcome options. There's trade the land, sell the land, repurpose, leave vacant, or discontinue the process. Since the retreat, we have one new development in regards to trading the land. We do have one developer that would be open to discussions and interested, that if we were to close the schools, they would be interested in following the due process and starting the due process to coming up with a land trade agreement. And that is in their words, as closely as I can quote them. But the key word there is, they're interested if we close. So that is the key part of coming up, if that is one of the options that the board wants to pursue. In regards to phase 4 timeline steps, the first step is calling for property and land appraisals. We had the PRO in place at the time of the retreat. We have not initiated it, and we kind of paused it until we had this study session. But that first step is only needed if we pursue selling the land, which needs voter approval, or trading the properties. And both of those require governing board action items. And then the other 4 steps in the process in regards to the timeline are the same for no matter what we do. We need to submit to the School Facilities Oversight Board. We need to form the Attendance Boundary Committee. We need to have the public hearings for both the attendance boundary and the repurposing or school closures, and then coming back to the governing board as an action item. So those items in red, no matter which option we do, are required. For phase 4 and phase 5, in looking at all the options, steps number 1 and 2, the phase 4 timeline is needed for all the outcome options. And same thing for step number 2, the governing board action item. That is needed for everything except that we decide to discontinue the process. Steps 3 and beyond vary depending on what the outcome is. So if we go through this process and between the 3 potential sites, each site ends up with a different option, as in one is sell the land, one is trade the land, and one is repurpose, all 3 would have different timelines and steps in moving into phase 4 and 5, or phase 5. At this time, administration is open for questions and comments.
So 2 things just to follow up. First of all, thank you, Mr. Molino, for all the work you have done alongside the different groups that you're working with, trying to explore all the different options. I've been very thankful for your diligence in this process. Ms. Myers has been a key partner in that work, and this goes all the way back to when Mr. Gay was here and started that process, and so we thank him for his work as well. We have heard from the board, I have heard from the board, individual board members, feedback that there's concern around making a decision like this without knowing what we would do with those closed schools. And what we have found out after quite a bit of work is that we also now do not have, we're not 100% sure that we have a trade partner. And so what Mr. Molino was alluding to earlier is that what they've told us is when you close the schools, come to us, and now we will be ready to invest. This is my interpretation. Now we will be ready to invest time, energy, and resources into potentially trading the land. But until that decision has been made by the board, it's not, I'm just assuming from their perspective that's not in their best interest to invest that kind of resources if they don't even know if the properties yet exist. And that makes a lot of sense, obviously, to us. But we do not have or cannot at this time tell you what we will do with those properties because there's a lot that goes into it. And if the board, right, if we move through this process and the board chooses to close the schools, then we would have to start that second process of deciding what we would do with those facilities. So we're now at the middle of August, and for us to start this process, which is extensive, will now require some significant investment on our part. Up until now, for the most part, I'm going to look over at our team. For the most part, the investment has been time and energy, right, from our staff. It's been very little financial impact. But as we start to move forward and we start to talking about how we get appraisals, now we got to start, right, investing in working with the state, those kinds of things. It's now time to invest some financial resources, and we wanted to have this last study session from the board and hear from you, your feedback.
Thank you for that, Dr. Reynolds. Mr. Merlino, appreciate the time. Ms. Hill, questions, comments?
Yes, thank you very much for putting that all together. I know it's been a long process, and there's a lot of details involved and a lot of big questions that still are left unanswered, correct? So I would agree. I was going to be very shocked, honestly, if we were going to be able to get definitive answers as to what's going to happen to these schools if we were to, take the next step. Because there's just so many things. I can foresee that maybe we could even have someone that had an interest in purchasing, and it might fall through, just like a house. So we can't really necessarily give any guarantee to any of it. So we can hope, that something that we have a vision for will come to pass, but it may not. So I understand, it's business, and so it's tricky. I guess one of the questions that I had that I hadn't asked before is just the theoretical. If we were to close or repurpose the school of one of the schools, for example, would that be something that we could, make sure that there's, let's say we did close it for perhaps, for whatever reason, would the kids and the students and the parents be uprooted possibly in the middle of a school season, or would this be something where we might be able to make arrangements to get through a school season, a school year, so that there's not as much disruption? So I was wondering about that detail.
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, any timeline in regards to after the action item of closing the school and when we start going to phase 5 to setting the actual date? It would be ending a school year on June 30th, 2023, June 30th, 2024, June 30th, 2025. We would not close the school mid-year. We would make sure that a full school year is completed and that we have enough time to logistically relocate the staff to other campuses, make sure that the parents have the right communication in regards to what schools are going, and that logistically we are prepared to make sure it's as seamless as we can make it.
Oh, good. Well, I'm very glad to hear that, just so if that's one of the scenarios that we go with, at least we don't leave everyone in a lurch mid-year, which is very difficult. So this gives everyone a summer to realign and get acclimated to a new setting if that's necessary. I was also wondering, because just out of curiosity's sake, if there was a way for us to find out how many teachers specifically and staff are at each school, because if we were to close these schools, that would actually be teachers and staff members that would be poured back into our system, correct? So with our teaching shortage that we have, this would benefit, that's the one upside, I guess, is that we would have a benefit of having teachers come back into the fold of the schools that were, in desperate need of teachers. So is there some way to find out how many teachers are at each school and what capacity, and how that would impact, our teacher shortage?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, we have that data. I do not have it with me tonight. I can include in tomorrow's Friday report, but we have looked at that over the last few months in regards to not just the staffing positions, but how many vacancies we have throughout the district, and that's how we are pretty confident that not a single staff member would be reduction in force or laid off through the process, that we do have a home, especially with our teacher shortage and classified staff shortage.
And if I may, excuse me, one of the assumptions that we make when we talk about closing a school is that we will, so let's just pretend there's 50 teachers inside the school, right? That all of a sudden 50 teachers would be freed up to go fill vacancies throughout the district, right? That's not exactly how that works, because you still have those students who need a teacher. They're just being moved to another building. It's not one for one, but it is not, it's not as simple as saying, in this school, there's 50 teachers, we have 50 vacancies, close the school, put those teachers in the vacancies, because those students still need teachers. They just need those teachers now in a different building. So that's why when we talk about cost savings and those kinds of things, the cost savings that comes around the teacher in the classroom is not, it's somewhat negligible. The cost savings when we talk about staff comes from all the support staff that goes into that site.
Thank you for that. I assume, and you're right, you're right. Obviously, we are going to, obviously take over these kids that are going to need a new school, but I am going to be presumptuous in thinking that we're not going to get them all. That there could be some that decide to go with, online, a charter school, another, because we have vouchers now. So they can choose to go to another district. So with that, I think it does change things up a bit as far as, we'll still get, I think, the majority of them, but I think there's going to be some kids that won't stay with our district, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and of course, then that comes with a loss of ADM and a loss of funding, and so that's absolutely an impact.
Sell the
Yeah.
land, then in theory, hopefully we'll, so it's really hard. There's so many, different variables here. So you're right. I mean, it's really hard until we know exactly what we're doing. If we're trading the land, if we're selling the land, if we sell it, then we get money from that. So it's so hard to know. And my last question too was, do you have any information on the trade? Was it one specific school, or what land are we referring to for the trade, and where, can you give any specifics about what that trade actually is?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, no, we do not have that level of detail at this time. They do not want to engage with that level of detail until we've committed that we've actually closed a school, or 1 or 2 or 3 schools, and what properties are available.
So they're not even expressing an interest in a particular school?
No, ma'am.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate all your information.
Thank you, Mrs. Hill. Ms. Underhill?
Yes, so I kind of had some similar questions along the lines. Mine were more around the cost savings. So I went back to like our August 20, whatever, a year ago about update that we had, and we talked about all the information that the committee had gone through and the data sets, et cetera. But I can't find sort of like where, and then I feel like numbers were presented, but what is our actual financial impact? And you said staff is negligible, but from just operations standpoint.
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, and I believe it was the May study session, we did have cost savings impact, and it was mostly classified staff and administrative staff at the sites, along with utilities and just overhead expensive of maintaining the sites. And for all 3 sites, it was approximately, and I can get you the exact number in the Friday report, it was approximately between $2 and $2.2 million per year. And that did not include any certified staff.
But that does include like facilities management, like all the utilities, all that kind of,
Yes, ma'am.
just maintenance of the facility. Okay.
Correct.
And again, one of the things to consider, and I just want to walk through some of these different things, is that savings is only realized if we no longer are charged with upkeeping the property. So if we continue, right, if our voters were to say no to selling it, or we don't have a partner to sell, or we can't trade it, then we would still be maintaining those facilities in some way as a resource. So I don't want you to think it's $2 million, boom, savings. There's still a cost if we repurpose in electricity and, right, those kinds of things.
And I'm sorry, just to clarify, that's annually 2.2?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then my other question around that was just, and I think Mrs. Hill kind of said it, but just trying to get the sequence of events here. So if we were to vote to close the schools and then all of a sudden had no developer, like that just didn't materialize, what would be our course of action in that case?
So if you these different options, if trading the land wasn't, then we would have to decide, right, what are we going to do next of the three remaining options? Are we going to go to our voters and ask them to give us permission to sell the properties? Are we going to repurpose those facilities into something else? I've shared with the board in the past, as a district, it is not as if we don't need space, right? We do need space, right? When you walk around this facility, when you walk around a Choya or other facilities that are out, operational facilities that are out there, we do have, we do need an opportunity to spread out a little bit. It's just the matter of that we don't need all of those classrooms necessarily. And so that when we talk about repurposing, right, we have programming that is where programs are competing for space and they've outgrown the facility that they're in. There are opportunities to repurpose, right, those facilities into other things that we've talked about. The other option with that is, one of the things we have not yet explored, and that is, which doesn't require closing the school, and that would be repurposing part of the school right, meaning adding programming. And I think about Canyon, right, where we have a very important program in our district that's on that site, right, that is part of Canyon's family, but a separate program. So there are opportunities for that as well. And then, of course, always there's an option where that facility sort of sits idle, but that's not as I've shared with the different groups that have worked, that's not an ideal option.
So and I mean, this is, who knows the answer, but how long would you actively seek to find a land developer that would be willing to trade?
President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, if we follow the Phase 4 timeline and we get to a point that we can have an action item, let's say by December of this school year or the last board meeting of the calendar year, right after that we would start the talks with the one land developer and see how far we can go. I think we would know pretty quickly in regards to the assessments if they would be interested or not, or if they're only interested in 1, 2, or 3 sites. Then depending on the value and working with Ms. Myers, what are they offering? And it's not just what we're offering, what are they offering us in return? Because if it's not to our benefit, then it may not be a good choice.
And as you can imagine, that would be it's a long process, right? That's not something that you can get solved because there's a lot of legalese and all of those things that we have to go through. So, and processes that we have to follow with the state and those kinds of things. So it is a lengthy process.
Sorry, just one more. On the third one, the yellow, repurpose the school facility. So if we were to only repurpose a part of the school, or, then do we still close the school? So I guess what I was hearing is that there's a hybrid in there somewhere of we still have the school, but we utilize it for additional purposes.
I think if we didn't move forward, we still have the issue of needing to be more efficient with our space. The key is we would also need to invest, right? If you remember, these facilities were chosen for a variety of reasons, not simply because that they have low enrollment, right? Enrollment was a factor, but we, through our facility utilization and needs that these facilities have in the future, so we would need to invest in those schools and bring them up to where we need them to be, and then we would need to explore how we would potentially bring programming together. So here are 3 programs that have outgrown their space. What does that look like, and how do we? And that may not impact. It might not impact one of these 3 schools. It could impact right? That's something we would then open the opportunities up to a variety of our smaller enrollment schools and see what that looks like.
So if that were to be the case, then the board would not need to vote
You
to
would
close the
not need to
schools?
close a school.
Okay,
We would work with the school community to, again, much like a canyon, right, adjust what that might look like and find facilities where that makes sense. But there's challenges with that as well.
okay, and this is just like kind of a one-off, but it goes with that. And that is, are there potential programs where the district doesn't have to provide transportation, or is that a requirement for us? That regardless, we have to provide transportation? Just because I know that's a significant cost, it's a significant challenge. So I'm just curious.
So ask your question again, please.
I'm just curious if our district is required to provide transportation. So if we are to say we put some magnet to share a school with one of the schools that's been identified, are we required to provide busing to that school for that magnet program?
No, we're not. So we have signature programming that families can open enroll into where we do not provide transportation to each of those.
Okay.
Now, the other piece of that is if we were to close schools, we would be potentially transporting more students, because if you are in the Skyview community and now we need to move you to a sister school, you were a walker, now we have to provide transportation because you're outside that area.
Okay. No, I was just curious about that, just with all the challenges that we've had with transportation, if there might be some option there. So, thank you. I'm good.
Thank you, Ms. Underhill. Just real quick, I'm going to piggyback on the transportation question. So right now, like with the Met, if you're at Sunrise or Liberty, but you want to go to the Met programming, right? We provide transportation for that, right?
Yes, I believe the question is, are we required to? We do provide, there are some programs where we do provide transportation, and I was going to look at Dr. Hernandez, but she's not going to know the answer to this question. I'll look maybe over at our whole team. There are some CTE programming that we provide transportation to. We have the Met that we do, but if you enroll into our gifted program at Apache, yes? Anyone? Do I have that right? Yeah, okay, good. If you open enroll there to take part of that signature program, we don't provide transportation to you for that.
If you're coming from a school that's outside of the boundary, even though it's in Peoria Unified, is that right? Or just coming from outside of a district as a whole?
Even if you were a student who lives outside that attendance area,
Okay.
and you choose to open enroll into a school with that programming, we don't provide transportation for that. Does that am I saying that?
No, it does. I guess where I'm headed is, knowing that, again, if you're going to Sunrise or Liberty and you want to attend the Met, we provide transportation for that, yes. And where I'm headed is, if, we potentially repurpose one or all these sites to include some type of academy, bioscience, whatever it is, if a student is at another site but wants to take part in that program, and again, I know we're talking about elementary versus high school, so the program is a little bit different in those offerings. I get that, but fundamentally, if there's a specialty program at one of these sites or all of these sites that a student wants to attend who's at Park Ridge, let's say, my assumption is, well, it may not be an obligation, but from a standpoint of our own values to ensure student success, I would assume that we would provide transportation from a Park Ridge to a Skyview if there was some special program in there that a student could take advantage of or wanted to take advantage of.
So are we required to? No.
Right.
We're not obligated to provide that transportation. Would that be part of the discussion that went on, right? If we were to move programming or those kinds of things? Sure, transportation always comes up when we're talking about, putting specialty programs, signature programs in different areas. It doesn't exclude us from providing transportation, but we're not required to provide transportation.
No, I get it. If we could stay on this slide for a second, and I apologize for asking this question, but I know we started this discussion, pre-pandemic, and we've kind of just resurfaced it. What I see new on here is the last column of just discontinue the process, just stop the process, right? So if we take a look back at not the outcome of the discovery of the committee that we put together to define, what sites would make sense. But my question is this, from a district perspective, can you talk a little bit about, or just refresh my memory as to the premise behind why we started this process in the first place?
President Sandoval, I was not here during that time, but my understanding, maybe Ms. Myers or Ms. Airy that were here, in 2019, when the facility utilization studies were done, along with the capacity studies, from those studies, Superintendent Linda Powles-Thompson saw the results, and at that time, she saw the need to look into it further, and then the committee was formed to actually look at the studies, analyze, and see if there were any potential sites that could be considered for closing and or repurposing to determine what they were. And that's when they set the 15 different data points where student enrollment was only one of the items, but then it was building infrastructure, location, proximity to other schools, things like the water canal that's just north of us, which is south of Pioneer, and there were other factors. And that led then to, going back September 30th, 2020, I believe, and that's when those results were presented to the governing board for the first time, and that's really when this school repurposing process kicked off.
Ms. Myers, it looked like you were going to comment. No.
I was going to jump in, but Mr. Molino did a very good job summarizing the history. Thank you.
Gotcha. Well, I guess for me, and again, I've mentioned this before, I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around, and maybe the district, can help me with this, is just really help me kind of unpack the last, couple of years, roughly. And, as we've gone through COVID, and when you take a look at capacity or ADM at these sites, right? Because if I'm not mistaken, are there not some sites that have a lower ADM than some of the sites that have been chosen?
President Sandoval, the answer is yes. And that's why the 15 data points in regards to student enrollment capacity was just one of the data points, and there were 14 others that were analyzed.
Gotcha. So I think for me, it always comes down to why we're here. And it is, how we wrap ourselves around all of our students, all of our young scholars, right? From pre-K all the way up to, 12th grade. And I've said it before, but what I am proud of regarding this district's intentionality and how it continues to wrap its arms around meeting students where they're at any given moment. It adapts to the shifting needs of our student population. And, when you take a look at some of these sites, and I've said, look, every site has a story, and I just want to make sure that, as we take a look at these 15, I'm going to call them variables, that what's considered is those needs, of those students and those families and those communities, and making sure that, as we've gone through this, have we taken a step back to really understand and really think about if we do close one or all of these schools, the impact that it may have on those families and those students regarding their success, certainly their health and wellness, and how they move through our doors here in Peoria Unified, and leave them, as successful and confident and adapted adaptable individuals. I just want to make sure that we're centered around that, versus, again, we just discovered, there are some sites that have a lower ADM than these three. But I just want to make sure that we're always centered around that. And I'm sure that we are, but so where I'm heading into is that last column on slide 7, which reads, or just stop. Is there anything new that we have discovered or that we've been thinking about that would say, you know what, maybe this is a process that, we began but after what we've gone through and maybe there's new information, maybe it's a process that, we should just stop at this point due to, the new information, if I will. So I guess that's my question. The addition of discontinuing the process, why that's there, what we're thinking as a district, and why that's now an option.
Well, and what I would say is, stop is essentially pause, right? We've been in this position several times as we've moved forward. We've taken our time in this process. Part of the reason why it has taken a few years to get through this is some of the challenges that President Sandoval you just highlighted. We do not yet know what the total impact of the circumstances we've been dealing with over the last few years are going to be for quite some time, right? I mean, we're understanding where we are right now. We'll talk about that a little bit in our academic goals and those kinds of things a little later, but we have not yet stabilized and gotten to a point where we are sure this is the baseline, and now we know. So that's new, right? We've been approaching pretty much everything we've been doing over the last few years with, I talked with our whole team about this. Last year I stood before the district and said, we're moving on. Pandemic is behind us, right? And then we spent an entire calendar year, entire school year dealing with even more challenges from the pandemic. So I'm not making that mistake ever again. But, right, so that's new, right? We're still living this and not fully understanding where we are. The second piece is, as I have heard from individual board members in study sessions, that if we're going to move forward with this process, they want a clear understanding of what the end will be, and we can't do that. Yeah. And so, we've explored those options, and those are really the new factors that we face. We have a year where we're continuing to focus and work on our, I don't want to say recovery, but how we are adapting, right, to our new reality. And so, yes, there are a lot of new things, new challenges that we are facing, and why, as we get to this point all along, right, because technically we didn't start the repurposing process 3 years ago, right? Technically, we started exploring the idea of closing schools 2.5 years ago. We are now at the point, right, to start the closure process, and that's where we are in these phases.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, and I guess that was the lane I was on, right? When we talk about the phase that we are in regarding the pandemic and how we are recovering and adapting as a district, to, again, really address those shifting needs, that our student population is presenting. I mean, while we're still kind of figuring that out and adapting and implementing and problem solving, maybe this isn't the right time, to continue in this process, or maybe this is the right time to pause this process, as we, spend. I mean, I don't know what that timeline is to really understand when it's figured out, but, from listening to what you just said, I mean, it sounds like as a district, we are seeing, other opportunities or challenges within a student population that we are currently addressing, and again, problem solving and implementing other programs and just redundancy to ensure their success. Again, with that said, alone, understanding, some of these sites and really digging in to, when you talk about the challenges or the opportunities they may have had before the pandemic and what they may be going through now that we need to figure out, maybe it is the right time to pause. And then, take a look at this, in a year. Again, that's kind of an arbitrary statement, but, just kind of piggybacking on what you said, Dr. Reynolds, it just, I think it would be the prudent and the right thing to do to get our students back, up to those levels from an academic success perspective, and even from a social and emotional perspective, and then let's look at from a property regard what our district looks like and what we may need to do to adapt at that point. But until we get to a point of back to those levels of student success, academically, emotionally, developmentally, I would be supportive of, pausing this process until that point.
Well, thank you for that feedback. And the reason why I sort of adapted that into pause is because I don't want to suggest that the work that has gone in to this, that would somehow be for naught, right? This has been really valuable information, valuable work that we've done, and will be valuable to us as we move forward.
So let me ask you this, at this point, being that this sounds like a final study session prior to a line item being presented or, landing on an agenda in a future governing board meeting, what will help you as a district determine whether we add this on to a future governing board meeting to move forward in the process? I know we're not voting on anything this evening. It's still learning more. But, how can we help as a board, kind of be, I guess a sounding board or a thought partner in, determining, whether this lands on a future governing board meeting or we press pause. And if we press pause, is that something that we need to be involved in, or something that you, Dr. Reynolds, and the district and team would kind of sit down and take a look at all the factors and determine, let's pause on this for a sec.
Yeah, so it's that feedback, right? It's getting an understanding of where the individual board members are kind of where we're at. Because up until now, it's been very informative, right? We bring information, we bring information, we bring information. Now you have all the information that really you can possibly have in order to kind of figure out as we move forward. So the answer to your question is no. As I seeking feedback, that would be something that I would take, right, what we hear this evening and go back to the team and have a discussion, and it would be a decision that I would make.
Gotcha. And I know we have two board members who aren't present this evening who will probably, provide feedback to you, post this evening's meeting. So, yeah, for me, that's my feedback. We still have some opportunities, and, let's get our kids, back to, those levels of success that they deserve, and let's go from there.
I appreciate that very much.
Yeah.
So I understand, I agree with that, train of thought. I guess what it comes down to me, and I know you don't have these answers right now, and maybe that's why that makes sense, is just, is the cost savings, the 2.25 or whatever it is annually, mission critical for the organization? And is the needed space mission critical, and do those things, are they mission critical over what's happening with our kids and our families? So I guess, that's kind of the question. And I know we don't know those answers because we still have AEL out there. We still have COVID, whatever we're in now, recovery, whatever we're in. So I guess I'm just curious if we've identified the level, that those things impact us right now.
Yeah, so when we think about the financial impact, we are not in a position where those savings are absolutely mission critical at this point, right? It is, and I'll look to Ms. Myers as well. My comments earlier about that's not a hard number. There's no way to, and the reason why we don't count on that as part of our budgeting process is because we don't know what that number actually will be. There may be relatively small savings if it comes to, if we repurpose those sites into other types of facilities. Clearly, if we close them down and we are no longer responsible for their care, then there is a significant amount of potential savings. But again, we wouldn't realize that savings for quite some time because there's a long process that goes into whether or not we're going to be able to sell the land, whether we're going to be able to trade the land, right? Those are not savings that we would realize this spring or next fall or right away when that process happens. So now when you talk about space, when you talk about programming, being able to explore new options, being able to explore new opportunities for students, being able to expand some of the amazing programming that we currently have, that is mission critical. It is not, closing a school is not the sort of the sole piece that would determine that success. We can find some other options, and if we choose, if this process pauses right now, we would then start, Mr. Molino's not off the hook, right? We would then start, where are our programming, right? Working with Dr. Hernandez, and what is, where are our programs that are on top of each other and need to expand in order for them to serve more students, and what does that look like, and how could we potentially bring an elementary school together with that program? I think of something like our Peoria traditional school with Coyote Hills, right? There's a partnership that took place based on opportunity and space and availability, those kinds of things, capacity. So there are opportunities out there without closing a school. It doesn't help us in some of the other areas, right? It doesn't fix some of the empty seats that we have, but it allows us to utilize our space more effectively, more efficiently.
Well, that was very helpful. So I would be kind of in the same alignment with President Sandoval in regard to potentially pressing pause and looking more at how can we better utilize our space if there's opportunities there that works for the families and the kids and everybody in those communities. Thank you.
Just so I better understand too, I'm getting the sense that the main drive to, maybe repurpose these schools or close these schools or whatever we're going to do is maybe to generate monies or to produce other facilities that will better accommodate the needs that we have right now. That's my understanding of it, that we have certain needs that aren't necessarily being met, and that might mean, possible building or with a trade of land and building and that sort of thing, but that takes money. But are we really looking for, selling and making money, or do we really, and then waiting to purchase or to build later? I guess I'm trying to figure out how does this all come together, and what's the big need out there specifically for our district? Is it money based? Is it need based? Is it, what? Just so I can wrap my head around it just a little bit better, if someone could explain that to me.
Yeah, so my direction as I took this over from Mrs. Pallas Thompson with our group, right, is that certainly being good stewards of our resources is a really important part, a responsibility of not only our job as district employees, but also the governing board, right? But it is not, in public it's not the sole reason, right? We wouldn't have started this process simply to save money. There are lots of things that go into that. It is certainly an element. We are assessed as a school district based on our square footage, right? Based on how much square footage we have to serve students. And so when we think about things like the school facilities board and how much they're willing to help us when it comes to new construction, those kinds of things, it's harder, right, to gain their assistance because they evaluate us as an entire district. And so although we might have a school in one part of our community that is busting at the seams, they evaluate us based on all of the seats availability, right? So they just look at it as, well, just take students from this school and bus them to the school that has the seats, right? Now you don't need, but that's not realistic either, right? We're not going to bus students an hour on a bus or 45 minutes on a bus to take them from a northern area to a different area. So that's why we start that process, so that we're finding those ways. We can't count on the cost savings. We can't count on being able to generate dollars. We have to look at it from the idea that in a closure process, it could end up still, the cost could be fairly negligible. Again, I keep bringing this up, that if we're going to move programming into that facility, there is very little cost savings that happens there, right? Because we're still running that facility, we're still paying for the electricity, still, right, making sure that it's cool, we're still mowing the land, all of those kinds of things. So that cost savings can't be the number one factor.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted a little bit more clarification on that, and it just seems like there's just so many unknowns. So that's always a hard thing for us as a board, I think, to come to terms with, and of course the public, because we can't get definitives, and so the public can't get them either. So that's just the big thing, is we almost have to dive in if we're going to go for it, and hope that everything falls in place. And I guess my only other question too is, we've got multiple schools that we're looking at for repurposement. So is this kind of an all or nothing thing where we close all of them at once, or do we do them one at a time, which I think would be a little bit easier than trying to manage 3 different scenarios, which might be, very different for each school. So how does that work? We don't just, at the end of a school year say, okay, just going to close all the schools and we'll see what we can do. Or do we try to manage each one separately, so they might all be at different time frames? Is that kind of how this operates?
So sure, we can establish different time frames for closure. What I wouldn't recommend to the board is that you go through the closure process for one school now, and then next year go through the process for another school, and then the next year because it's not easy, right? And so I think why you take a holistic approach in this process. It doesn't mean that all schools in the process, or if the board chose to close 3 schools, that all those schools would close on the exact same date, right? It could be a phased approach, but I wouldn't recommend that we go through the process each year. That would be tough.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I've never done this before, so I'm trying to figure out exactly how do the nuts and bolts come together? How do we actually pull this off, basically? Because there's a lot of legal issues here, and people are involved, kids are involved. It's a long, hard process. I think for every single school, no matter how the outcome is, it's not going to be an easy transition. And it probably won't end up anywhere how we thought it was going to go. So I was just trying to figure out if I could wrap my head a little bit around the process of it. So that does, help me with the clarity of that. So I thank you.
Yeah, and I think just again to add to your point, and that's why I appreciate the feedback, is it is a very difficult process, right? And I don't mean it is difficult in the technical aspect, but in the emotional aspect, right? And these school communities, and I've said this before, we use terms like facility, right? School, these are communities that are going to be disrupted if we choose to go through it. And so it is why it's so important that as we have this discussion, if this isn't the right time, that we don't go through it just to go through it.
Thank you. Anything else? You good? Thank you, Ms. Hill. Appreciate it.
Just wanted to say I appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other further questions, comments for the district? Mr. Molino, thank you, sir. Dr. Reynolds, thank you. All right, moving on to 3.2, Superintendent Performance Goals for the 2022-2023 school year. Dr. Reynolds?
Thank you very much, President Sandoval. Give me 1 second to adjust my agenda here. Thank you very much. We are back at the beginning of the school year, and at beginning of each school year, as you are well aware, it is our responsibility as a board and the superintendent to establish the goals for this year for me and a way for you to evaluate performance. So I have, at the beginning of each year, I bring my thoughts on what I would like to see as our agreement on what those goals will be. Tonight is an opportunity for me to seek some feedback from you on these goals, make any changes or based on that feedback, and then bring them to you at next week's governing board meeting for approval. So I'd like to walk you through those unless there's any other questions that you have.
No, I don't. Ms. Hill, you have any at this point? Yeah, me neither. Ms. Underhill? No. I'm sure we'll have some as we go through.
That's right. Okay. So again, the purpose of this topic tonight is A, to get your feedback on the goals, but also to establish, if you remember in the last process, it was sort of the last minute where we decided how that performance-based pay would be allocated, and so we also want to have that discussion as well. So not only on the content, right, conceptual content of the goals, but also then on the process that we'll use to evaluate the success of those. So goal number one, if you can see in the 4 goals that have been provided to you, I have framed these goals around our 4 perspectives. So when we look at student success, we've got safety and well-being, community connection, and stewardship of resources. And so I've established one goal under each of those 4 perspectives. Each of these goals, don't be fooled by the amount of space they take on the paper, right? It is when we get into the safety and well-being, community connection, and stewardship of resources, there's a tremendous amount of effort from an entire team that goes into accomplishing all 4 of these goals. So student success is to stabilize and or increase student achievement of the assessment categories below. And so the format's a little different, but if you can think back to last year's goals, it's very, very similar. I set performance goals, academic goals in each of these same 12 areas. And then also we have 7 more, and I don't know what it looks like for you. You should have those in front of you if you don't. But there are 7 more, and I've combined the satisfaction survey as well. So one of the challenges we faced is how do we assess whether or not I've accomplished these goals, and then how will the board assign performance pay to those. So let's just take a look at the first achievement data point. So K2 ELA I-rated proficiency. This is the same goal that we had last year, or same goal area. I provided the 2022 score there, I-ready proficiency score, right, for K2. What we would do then as a board, and as we move forward, and I present to you back in next June, is how we performed in each of these areas. If we remain the same or improved, as you can see, a little bit, then we would assign 1 point. If we improved a little bit more, we would assign 2. And if we achieve more than we're predicting, then another point would be assigned there. What we would then do, based on each one of these data points, we would add those up, and you can see right below there are 19 data points, and I've suggested that a score of 19 to 23 would result in 50% of this goal being met. A score of 24 to 28 would result in 75% of the goal being met, and a score of 28 plus would result in 100% of the goal being met. I think it's important to remember, and we talked about this when we were in the repurposing topic. We are still in the middle of a pandemic that is impacting, that we expect to continue to impact the ability for, or the health and well-being of our students and staff. And so we do not have a prediction on what that's going to look like, but we're fairly confident that Our teachers are going to miss time because of illness, and our students are going to continue to miss time because of illness. We're getting much better at being able to handle that, but it still remains a pretty significant impact. Last year at this time, as I shared with you, we believed we had stabilized. We believed that we had created that foundation. We were down to the baseline, and what we learned last year is we had not yet, and that we still had more things to learn. So when we talk about illnesses to our staff and students, that's gonna have a significant impact. We're also facing an unprecedented teacher shortage where we have moved at approximately 50 staff members around the district. We have collapsed class sizes in order to make sure that every child has a teacher in front of them who cares about them and wants to create that engaging learning environment. And so our class sizes in some instances have gone above our standard. And so that class size is going to potentially impact our ability to be successful as well. And of course, as we've talked about, those lost learning opportunities that we've had over the last few years have had a much greater impact than even we understood a little bit ago. So this is the suggestion that I have for you. Again, they're the same goal areas. They've just been adjusted based on our performance from last year and how we're going to improve our students' academic performance. And the same concept goes if you turn the page over and we talk about our satisfaction survey. I've done the exact same thing. So created what we hope is the baseline and that we can start to improve upon each of these areas. The one thing that I would say in here is, as you remember, when we analyzed the survey data from last year, we didn't take into account that middle area of neutral. And so, although I use the example because it's come up several times, we had an example where our staff, and I'll use the last one on this graph, I'm committed to seeing my district succeed. 96.4% of our staff, which is incredible, right? It's really, really high. But one of the questions that comes up is, what are the other 3.6%? Why aren't they committed to our success? 0 respondents responded that they disagree or strongly disagree with the fact that I'm committed to seeing my district succeed. 3.6% of them said, I'm not sure how I feel today, when they answered neutral, right? And so that neutral piece, when you don't force a response, it does allow for a lot of variables, and we saw that that we didn't account for when we set the goals. We're hopeful that using a point system like this, it will take into account and kind of ease some of the variables that come with that neutral perspective. Do you want me to pause there and talk about goal number 1? You want me to move on to the other goals?
Yep.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, dealing with the neutral responses that you were just referring to, are we removing those completely so that they, or are we going to, I guess I wasn't quite sure how we're tackling that. I mean, I don't know that they're useful. I mean, is there some way to just remove them so that they actually have to commit?
Yeah, probably.
You know?
Yes, and probably a different topic. But we have decided with that Likert scale, and in order to, we've been using this survey for quite some time, and we've made some adjustments to it. We significantly decreased the amount of questions on that survey to make it more accessible to our families, to our students, to our staff. But what we've decided is on that Likert scale, based on the statistics, it's better to keep that format in place and not put us into a situation and try to solve the goal evaluation with this point system rather than going back and trying to recreate how we ask for feedback.
Thank you. It's just still a little unsettling that there's that one out there that we didn't get 100%, or really, really, really close to it, that that we actually have teachers possibly that don't want the success for the district.
Well, and remember, that is staff members. So
Okay, or staff.
Yeah.
Well, okay, or staff, teachers and staff.
Well, and I
It's
would just
a
say that
strange-
potentially on that day, I couldn't bring myself to bubble in right? I may be having a bad day when I took this survey and I went, I'm just feeling neutral on this today.
I don't know. That.
I
don't-
would
I don't get it.
definitely
That's
agree
one-
with you.
that
If
just-
it was 3.6% who said I strongly disagree or I disagree, I would absolutely, yeah, I would absolutely be
True.
concerned.
I personally would like to see that at 100%. That's my personal goal, you know? So, but thank
Agreed.
you for that clarification.
Ms. Center, any questions at this point?
No, I do appreciate the point scale. I don't know if I can't even honestly remember if we had that last, I didn't think we did. Did we have the?
No, we didn't.
Okay.
It was, and that was the challenge that we
Right.
faced and how, hopefully this will provide a much clearer,
Right.
so you don't get to the end of the year and now you're trying to figure it out.
Right. No, I think that's really good. And I think it's very realistic, for where we are and with the challenges we face. So I think it's well done.
Can you run through scoring and I get it, so each line, I'm looking at the achievement data, right? So just elementary. And, well, let's do high school since there's only, 4 lines there. So each line is going to have a score, right?
Right, so let's look at 912 ELA ACT proficiency, first one, right? So we have the score from last year. And if we score less than that,
Right?
and I see a typo there, so we'll correct that. Thank you. That could be the confusion. That's a cut and paste. That's a cut and paste issue. So thank you for that. Does that clarify?
It does.
You can see where we
Yeah,
cut
I
and
do
pasted
see
the
that.
top line. And so really what that would say is 39.6, less than 39.6,
Right.
would be 0 points.
Yeah, no, I get it. So each line item will have a score.
That's right.
And then, well, and maybe we're going to get into this discussion a little bit, but so, out of those 4 line items, high school, you would take an average of those scores to determine.
We would just add them up.
Just add them up.
Right, so let's say, right, we next year in ELA, ACT proficiency, we score somewhere between, well, let's use the one below that, 34.3. So let's say, well, let's not say we scored less than that. Let's say we scored between 34.3 and 35.2. We improved that little bit, then I would receive 1 point for
Gotcha.
that area.
Never
Then
mind.
we would
Yep.
add all of those up at the end, and I would present where did we fall? Between 19 and 23, between 24 and 28 points, between 28 or greater.
Got it.
And it kind of eliminates that ambiguity of,
Yeah. Perfect.
and again, we're not making a decision tonight. You can provide some feedback to me. You can also
Yeah, and I think,
continue to think about it and
Yeah, and one thing, I definitely want to make sure, just for you personally, from an expectation standpoint, I know we kind of ran into a little, I don't know, I'm going to call it a hiccup this year, or based on last academic year's goals, is, how each goal is going to be measured, right, based on pay, right? Got it, okay, perfect.
sorry, my mic's not on. So we'll address that at the end of that discussion.
Okay,
Right.
perfect.
So goal number 2 is under our perspective of safety and well-being. And our team is going to be, as you're aware, we presented this to you at our retreat. We're in the process of finishing up our crime prevention through environmental design assessments. That is our SEPTED assessments that we began, I think, 2 years ago. And we paused because of COVID and schools not being in session. And so now we are ready with our new safety and security coordinator to finish that work. And so we have, and I'm going to look over to Mr. Molino, how many schools do we have left? How many sites do we have left?
20 sites, sir.
So that's a heavy lift to accomplish those. There's a great deal of work that goes into each and every one of those, and it is going to take us from now until right up until the end of the fiscal year to accomplish all of those tasks. So I appreciate Mr. Molino and Mr. Reese and the work that they'll put into that. Goal number 3 is community connection, and that is really around our parent square and the work that Ms. Airy and her team are doing. This is a really, really fantastic project that we've been waiting for quite some time, and we're really excited about this. We have just kicked it off, as we talked to you about in our retreat, but we have a lot of work left to do in order to really take advantage of all the resources that this tool has. And so when we think about how we communicate with our parents, our teachers, our students, our community, we're going to work through this plan. It's going to take a heavy lift to be able to get through all of this by the end of the year, but we're confident that we can accomplish that. And then lastly, under stewardship of resources, working closely with Ms. Myers, really working to continue our work and our plan to align our budgeting process. We've got some scenarios that are some situations that we're facing. As you know, we are no longer able to access bond dollar. Well, I shouldn't say that. We are no longer selling bonds. So we don't have a current bond in place, and it is absolutely critical as we move forward that we align our resources to make sure that we are still able to provide resources to our schools while we wait to go out and ask our voters to approve that in the future. And so those are the 4 goals that I've established. The first goal, obviously, is one that we'll go through step by step to measure those outcomes. The next 3 are big tasks that we're all committed to accomplishing this year. I'll pause there and wait for your feedback.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Hill, any further questions, comments?
Oh, no, I think I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Underhill?
No, I think these are great as well, and I remember from our strategic plan update that you have all the color-coded tasks and et cetera underneath each one, so big goals, but that's what we need, so it's great, thank you.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Remember, these are just 4 things, 4 huge, giant things that we're working on. There are many, many, many other goal areas that each and every one of the people in this room, as well as our principals and our teachers and our staff, support staff have. There's lots of work going on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't have any further questions, comments. Thank you.
So then, I'd like to seek some feedback. I think what we did in last year was we assigned equal weighting to each of the goals, and that was 25% per goal area. I think, there is a sentiment that, right, student success and our academic achievement is that should be weighted more than the other areas. What I would say is, for me, it doesn't matter whether you assign it 10%, 25%, 100%. We are all in doing everything we can to support our students and ensure that they have everything that they need to be successful each and every day. So what I would prefer is 25% on each of those goals, but I obviously that is a decision that the board would need to make, and I'm open to feedback on that.
Okay. Ms. Hill, any thoughts there?
Yeah, actually, I guess my preference would be to put a little bit more on the academic side as well, just because I put that at the top because that's why we're here, and that's what we're trying to do, is to get our kids, if not ready for college, then ready for life, to be successful in whatever ventures they plan to go into after PUSD. And at the moment, they're not there, overall, they're just not there. The numbers don't lie. So I think that putting more effort into the academics is really important. It just is. There's only so much you can do with your life or to be successful if you don't put more emphasis on the academics. So I would guess I would propose putting more weight into goal 1, maybe 40% for goal 1, and then the remainder 2, 3, and 4 at 20% would be my recommendation.
Keeping the math simple is always appreciated, so yes.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Ms. Underhill?
Yeah, I recognize that as well as like being, obviously our first goal. And I'm not opposed to that 40, 20, 20, 20. I just want to remember that we are still in a pandemic and we have a teacher shortage and we have increased class sizes. So I do want to I want to recognize those challenges. And obviously that's our first goal. I would be fine with 25 across board too, just because we have so many different factors that really, we don't know what this year holds for us, So I would be fine either way.
Thank you, Ms. Underhill. Yeah, I think I'm of the same path as that, or Lane is, being okay with either way, 40, 20, 20, 20, or 25% across the board. There are so many, as you unwrap the achievement data, there's so much in there that impacts, those
Right.
numbers, from a growth and development perspective. So, but, I know, as you stated, and this is why we're here, and you guys are all in, and like I said earlier, I mean, I know you are very focused and intentional about, integrating those resources that our students need to be successful, so they come to school in the right mindset and are prepared to learn. So, yeah, I would support, 25 across the board, or even weighting the academic goal a little bit higher than that. Before you.
Thank you for that feedback. Just as a reminder, I'll take that feedback, make some changes, adapt a little bit. We'll correct the typo there. The typo has already been corrected. I'm sure Ms. Contra saw that and went, cannot wait to get that fixed, so thank you for that. And so then what we'll do is I'll do my best to make some of those corrections and suggestions and see, if there's any other feedback that comes up between now and when it's time to approve these next Thursday. Please don't hesitate to provide that.
All right, sounds good. Thank you, sir.
I would also like to point out that hopefully we are right on track. We might be just a touch behind, but not anything like what we've experienced in the past. So this is really good.
Good. Awesome. All right, so moving on to 3.3, fiscal year 2023 budget and compensation updates. Ms. Myers.
Yes, well,
Good evening.
thank you. Good evening, President Sandoval, members of the governing board. Dr. Reynolds, thank you for the opportunity to provide updated information on additional budget funding that the district has received for fiscal year 2023 and opportunities related to that funding for compensation. So tonight I will briefly discuss some of the work we've done to date from a budget priority and compensation perspective, as well as highlight the new funding that was received and approved by the legislature on June 23rd. We've also reconvened our budget team for input on priorities with that new funding. We'll talk a little bit about those opportunities that have been discussed to date and input that we have received from our various employee groups. Of course, the aggregate expenditure limit is still a concern, as well as to highlight next steps that we'll have, and then, of course, comments and questions from the governing board. And so with that, I'd like to present the slide that highlights the governing board's goals related to budget, and those goals were approved on February 27th, 2020, and I've shared this in the past with presentations to highlight the three main areas that have been the board's priority in recent years, including the development of an overarching compensation model for all employee groups with a phased-in approach to defined compensation outcomes, as well as ensuring consistent, equitable, and viable resources and professional development for staff. And then the third goal was to develop a multi-year plan to address facility and program utilization. And some of that work we just discussed in the prior agenda item. And so I always like to start with highlights of progress to date. that coincides with those goals and the work that the district and the budget team and administration has done in recent years. And I won't read them all. You've seen this before, but I like to remind our community of the progress that we have made, including increasing our years of experience at the point of hire from 5 to 7 years in fiscal year 2020, as well as increasing our beginning teacher salary for the 2021 school year to $40,114. And then, of course, most recently, this last fiscal year, we've had enhancements to non-certified teacher salary schedules for hiring and placement, as well as in 2022, we had an increase to the base based on longevity to really start focusing on compression, which has been a concern for many years that our employees have voiced, as well as administration has prioritized. So this at a glance, you've seen it before. In fact, on May 12th, when the governing board approved compensation increases to date based on funding that was available to date, of course, you'll recall that the legislature had not completed their work at that point in time. And so 2023, there was a 3% increase that was approved and is in every employee's salary at this point if they were eligible for the raise based on policy. But you can see the progress over the last several years. Of course, the 20 by 2020 funding was essential to this work, as well as the restoration of inflation funding for M&O. I did highlight fiscal year 2022, which is last fiscal year. You'll note, in addition to the percent increase to the base, we also offered an increase based on longevity, again, to address compression for our long-term employees who, in many cases, were frozen for a number of years if they were with us for 20 or so years. And so with that, we also, though, this year, in addition to the 3% increase to the base that was approved on May 12th, we also offered a retention stipend to employees returning to their positions this year that also was based on longevity phased, $500 to $2,000. So just some highlights. There's also work with classroom site fund and other priorities, but I highlighted these two areas, especially the 3% that's been approved to date, because that is the opportunity for us to look at possibly adding on to with this new funding. And so the other thing I'd like to highlight is the work that's been done last fiscal year, in particular for our classified team members, with the funding that was received in recent years, including the 20 by 2020, which was restricted for classroom teachers, Function 1000. We did prioritize classified staff in years 2 and 3 of that new funding to receive the same increase, that 5% in year 2 and then year 3. As well as you'll note, there was a recommendation from the budget team, and administration has supported that all groups were treated in a similar manner when it came to recommendations for increases to the base. So you see that again, the 3% was the most recent work, but classified in particular became very important because, as you'll recall, last year we had challenges with hiring bus drivers, and so in the fall we offered a new retention or hiring stipend, I should say, recruiting stipend for staff, as well as increased our transportation employees who hold a CDL license, $3.01. We had that mid-year increase for classified hourly, increasing 65 cents on the dollar, as well as recognizing the minimum wage increase that went into effect on January 1st, bringing the minimum wage up to $12.80 an hour. Most recently this summer, we had a DES grant that was approved by the board for our community preschool Kids Zone employees, and then the 100-day ESSER grant funding provided an opportunity for an additional retention stipend. The reason why I'm highlighting all of this, the 65 cents as an example, then was part of the base amount for classified staff, who then received the 3% on top of that mid-year increase. So it compounds every time we add to the base. The next year's raise is compounded on top of that prior increase. And then, of course, I previously highlighted the retention stipend based on longevity. So there was a desire to continue to address compression, especially for our classified who, due to the minimum wage increases in recent years, we went from $8.05 now to $12.80. Our classified had extreme compression, and we've done a lot of work in that area, and that still continues to be a priority at this point, and you'll see some of that prioritization in just a few slides. And so We are tracking another increase in January. We've heard of the teacher shortage. There's also a shortage for classified staff who are our support staff, be it professionals in IMT or operations or business. Across the board, we are having significant challenges hiring staff to support our district. You'll recall when we proposed our budget on June 23rd, I mentioned that the legislature had completed their work that day, and a budget package had been put in place that would impact Peoria Unified as well as other school districts' funding. You'll note with this slide, which the information is available on the Arizona Department of Education's website, there were new funding dollars allocated to not only the base support level, but special education weights within the funding formula and opportunity funding line item, gifted. All of those new formula additions resulted in new dollars for Peoria Unified. And in fact, if we go back and look at the work that we did this spring and the updates that administration brought to the budget team, you'll recall that we were working, if you look at the top box, we were working with $5.6 million of projected new funding. That new funding was based at that point in time, best information, because the legislature had not completed their work, and we made recommendations within that 5.6, including the 3% increase to the base. If you look at the bottom box, you will see those additional dollars being highlighted, the change within the funding formula itself, the additional weights that we're recognizing with our first budget revision, which we'll be bringing forward on August 25th, next Thursday. So we'll be actually asking the governing board to approve that first budget revision to fully recognize this new funding. We've already committed and spent 5.6. You'll see the red box toward the bottom, and that then identifies approximately $15.2 million of new funding that was part of that budget package that was approved by the legislature on June 23rd, I should say. And so with that new funding, we reconvened our budget team. And you'll recall as we provided updates last year, we started work with our budget team in October and met through April. In fact, there were 13 meetings that took place last year, and we have added 5 additional meetings to address this new funding. 4 have taken place, and I will share feedback and priorities from our budget team that have been shared with administration, as well as administration's input, as well as the fact that we have another budget team meeting on the books Monday, and feedback from our study session tonight will be shared with the budget team at that meeting. And just to remind you, in general, last year we had approximately 35 team members who participated in the budget team, and that was a mix of our certified, classified, and administrative staff who make recommendations to administration for budget and compensation priorities. And so with that, I do want to highlight that not only do we have a staffing shortage, a teacher shortage, but our demographic of employees is changing. And this slide really does highlight that we have a larger population of newer employees that work for the district. And so on the slide, you can see we still have a number of very loyal, long-term employees, very important to the success of the district. But as people reach retirement age and through natural attrition, people move on, new people come in, and so that sliding scale of long-term employees compared to newer hires, you'll see that percentage is shifting. And I will also note that we are still trying to hire. We have approximately 80 positions for certified staff that would include both classroom teacher and other non-classroom staff related services, as an example, as well as classified team members that we're hiring, over 200. So there's still a population that we're trying to recruit and hire, as well as retain not only our long-term employees, but those newer employees who just joined us or who've been with us for 5 years or less. And so we've shared these numbers. I've updated this slide as of August 17th to show the 0 to 0.99 category, the 437, but it does show that demographic is shifting to be newer employees. And so going back to how do we compete? How do we attract the best and the brightest when other districts received additional funding? In many instances, these districts have already made salary modifications, including adjusting their teacher salary schedule for hiring new teachers. Is difficult because oftentimes we're asked, well, isn't it an apples to apples comparison? And my response would be, well, in part, if a district has an M&O override and is a 15% override, and a district has a 13% M&O override, as is the case for Peoria Unified, there's a difference there from a funding perspective in excess of $4 million, and that's before the new funding. If you add on the new funding, it could be between $6 and $7 million. That's the delta. So we have sister districts who have that 15% M&O override who are making adjustments to not only their teacher salary schedule, but compensation as a whole, and we're competing for a very limited and finite pool of teachers and staff. And so it's a challenging conversation. So we looked at the work that we did in fiscal year 2021. And we reflect and say, well, up until that point, we had an approximate $36,000 beginning teacher salary. And I should note that's a mixture of M&O or grant funding, depending on where the employee is funded, with classroom site fund and instructional improvement. So it's a combination of multiple funding sources. I have an illustrative example there in the yellow box, but the point I'm trying to make, if we compare ourselves to other districts right now, we're on the lower end. 45, 49, 50, 52 is the going rate. That's our competition right now. So our team did look at this need. We looked at some scenarios, and every scenario I'm showing you right now is for discussion purposes. There's input, and I can share where there's some consensus with our budget team. But just in general, these slides are for discussion purposes only. We will be bringing forward recommendations for action by the governing board in the future. But for tonight, just discussion purposes, you'll see I boxed 48,000. That's the adjustment that our budget team had consensus on. And we then started working with that adjustment, including where we would have to bring current employees up to that dollar amount if they were not already at 48,000. You'll note at the bottom, because it is a salary schedule change, we would ask for ratification back to July 1st. And what that would then allow us to do is to adjust any newly hired certified teacher, classroom teacher, to that new salary schedule. And we would make that effective back to July 1st. So that's one area where there's been consensus, and we will be bringing a recommendation forward. Again, the other piece, and I highlighted this with our progress to date slide, we have 7 years of experience at the point of hire, and so you can see how those years of experience can adjust the teacher salary that's offered to a new employee. Again, for illustrative purposes only, we had the $2 amounts, the 48 and the 50. Please draw your attention to the $48,000 amount, and based on years of experience, we do recognize that when we hire a team member. We also talked about areas within our grade levels that really are a challenge, and 6th, 7th, and 8th was a discussion point Mrs. Vesely brought forward, and there was consensus to look at a hard-to-fill stipend for teachers who teach that grade level. We'd keep the dollar amount the same, but because we already have that $1,760 stipend in place, but it would be expanded to be available to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers, and we had an associated projected cost with that recommendation. And then we talked about classified, and I highlighted the work we've done, but the competition that we have and the challenges within an available workforce with classified staff. Not only is there competition from other districts, but other employers as a whole. We know we have staff that could go work in industry and have an immediate increase. And so being competitive, especially with classified staff, continues to be a priority. And so we looked at opportunities, be it a percentage increase for classified, and you'll see that in a moment as we looked at percentage increases across the board, or would we offer a $2 an hour increase to classified hourly and classified exempt. And you'll recall we've already had some movement for classified hourly and exempt employees who are Function 2100 and became eligible for classroom site fund funding. And I mentioned our DES grant that resulted in a $2 an hour increase for this fiscal year for our community preschool as well as Kids Zone employees. So whenever funding becomes available, we now prioritize it for its intended purpose. And I should highlight that oftentimes that's not Peoria Unified's decision. The funding's restricted at a state or a federal level, but we celebrate the opportunity and try to support that targeted area. So we've had the progress with Function 2100, as well as the DES grant for Kids Zone and community preschool. We would then say, well, if we brought forward this per hour increase, the $2 for all classified, hourly and exempt, it would be for all of the remaining employees who did not have that increase based on the other funding. So there's consensus and support around this type of an increase for our classified team members from our budget team. And that information has been shared with administration. This slide has a lot of information on it, but you can see what we've been considering, that juxtaposition of the $2 an hour for classified compared to a percent increase. If we were to offer the $2, we would not, on top of that, have a percent increase to classified. But for illustration purposes only, administration initially brought ranges of 1% to 3% from projection and a cost perspective. Our certified teachers in the budget team as a whole, unified, have asked that we consider something higher. 4 or 5% was suggested. So on this slide, I have all 5 scenarios that have been discussed and reviewed and the associated cost. Please note this is M&O only. This is an estimate at this point in time. It does not include grant funds. It does not include National School Lunch Program dollars. It's M&O that would come out of this new funding for fiscal year 2023 and would be an ongoing commitment from a budget perspective. In the case of if a percent increase is approved, I will note 2 things. Similar to when we approved the 3%, the employee would need to be with us for at least half the year per policy. I have the 2 policies listed here on this slide, so that means they would need to have been hired on or before January 31st to be eligible for the raise. Secondly, for the percent increase, it would not go back to July 1st, but rather would go into effect September 5th if the governing board were to approve recommendations on August 25th. So effective September 5th, the raises would go into place and then would be available on the September 27th paycheck to our employees. So again, just from a discussion perspective, we looked at a variety of percentages. And with that, I will now move on. In addition to a flat increase for all, we also looked at a variety of scenarios, and I have the last 3 examples we looked at just Wednesday of this week with the notion, what if we were to phase an increase based on longevity, similar to what we did for 2022. And so you see these 3 snapshots. The box to the left is 3, 4, 5% scenario based on years of service. The middle box would have just 2 cut points, 4% up to 19 years, and then 20 years plus would be 5. And then, of course, another option would be 3% up to 19 years and 4% for 20 years plus. So again, for discussion purposes, the associated cost, this was introduced, the budget teams provided feedback. Again, any increases would be subject to policy and would go into effect on the September 27th paycheck, assuming the governing board took action on August 25th. So then we get into where the budget team and administration have had conversations, and there are decisions that need to be made related to how much of this funding should be prioritized at this point in time and how much should be available for ongoing budget work in conjunction with the concern that, of course, the aggregate expenditure limit has not been addressed. It's a concern just like it was last year. Last year we had $43 million that was at stake if the legislature had not taken action by the deadline at the end of February. And those cuts would have gone into effect April 1st, the last quarter of the year. So that's still a consideration, and of course, these are ongoing commitments when you make salary adjustments, and we know that there's ongoing work to do. So this slide provides an example of some of the conversation that's taken place at the last couple of budget team meetings. That includes where there's consensus. So you see listed on the slide, if we were to move forward with a recommendation of the $2 increase for classified hourly and exempt, coupled with an increase to our certified teacher salary schedule, bringing it up to $48,000, and then that hard-to-fill stipend for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, you can see what portion of that new money would be used and what would be available for a percentage increase for certified as well as administration, and then what would remain. An initial description was reserve. I like to call it future budget priorities, opportunities, work. And if you were to run a variety of scenarios, and I can illustrate this for you, a 3% increase to certified in administration, if we plugged that in, would result in approximately $5 million remaining as uncommitted. A 4% increase would reduce that amount to $3.8 million. A 5% increase would reduce the amount to 2.5. And then, of course, those phased longevity-based increases would leave anywhere from 3.6 to $4.7 million. So the discussion around, well, what percentage should be prioritized now and what should be reserved not only for future budget work and priorities, but also considerations with the AEL. From an illustration perspective, if the board provides input and says, well, you know, we think that should be 25%, that's roughly $4 million. If we felt it needed to be 40%, that's $6 million, as an example. So that's that sliding scale as we try to make meaningful recommendations related to compensation for our employees to be competitive, to retain our loyal employees, many of whom have been with us for decades, but also to be competitive, to attract new employees. We know our sister districts have already raised the bar with that beginning teacher salary. We very well may, due to market conditions, need to adjust it again, possibly to $50,000 in the spring. That's another $1.5 million. So you can see how we very quickly could go through reserves or a set-aside amount. And not only with the beginning teacher salary, but we know, based on work we've done, we should be making periodic adjustments to our salary schedules as a whole to be competitive when we're hiring. And we just did that over the last couple of years, but you don't want to wait 5 years in between each time you do that. And there's also the issue that our grants and cash-controlled funds that support positions may not be able to pace with this new M&O funding. So that's always a concern, as well as if a grant terminates, do we bring those positions into M&O? We have a number of social workers that are funded right now by a state-level grant. Ongoing work, looking at job descriptions and reclassifications as needed, ongoing increases to the base, ongoing increases related to compression. Inflation impacts on the cost of operations. We've seen an increase in fuel, utilities, custodial, as an example, as well as we don't currently have a new bond authorization. We very well may be in the situation to have to transfer M&O to capital over time to address priority and essential needs at our districts related to maintenance and construction projects. And then, of course, current year funding, we're funded based on ADM. We're stable right now. District-wide, we have hyper growth in the north, but we have, in many areas, some aging out, so it's flat. We don't expect a sudden increase of new funding based on sudden growth. And there are unknowns, too, the voucher program that's now in place. So all of those things are a consideration in addition to the AEL. And then, of course, you've seen the AEL slide that I've shared many times. And relief valves, mechanisms, methods that we would use to address the AEL if indeed it was not overridden by the legislature. Next steps, we do plan to meet again on Monday as a budget team, and then we are planning to bring forward recommendations to the governing board on Thursday, August 25th, at the governing board meeting, where we will also revise our 2023 budget. That concludes the presentation. At this time, I'm available to answer your questions. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, as always, Ms. Myers, for the very complete discussion and presentation. Ms. Hill, questions, comments?
Yeah, I mean, the thing I always go back to, and I have a difficult time with this, my mother was a teacher, so I'm familiar with how they get paid and their compensation and the incredible amount of benefits that they do get. And my question or concern comes across with giving blanket increase in pays rather than it being more performance pay. There definitely are some teachers out there I think are just amazing, and they do a phenomenal job in the classrooms, and I don't think, giving everybody the same amount of increase in pay is attracting the better teachers and maybe getting rid of some of the ones that aren't, as good for our district. I mean, I would love to give teachers that are doing a phenomenal job in their classrooms more money, depending on their performance, than teachers that are just phoning it in. They're doing just the bare minimum to get a paycheck, and I know they're out there. So I would just love that. I would love to see us encourage our teachers to do better, to be the best that they can be. And I think paying them adequately in that regard, I mean, I have no problem paying big bucks to teachers that do a phenomenal job, but I have huge reservations about giving teachers across the board, no matter how well you did or how poorly you did, everybody gets a raise. Most jobs in the general market don't work that way. You have to earn it. It's all earned. And the retirement age is like 50 or 55. I also question this, is there any way that we can raise the retirement age for full benefits? Right now, teachers can retire with full benefits at age 55. That's very young, for, what we have for the standard in other places. Most people have to work to 65, 62. So my question is, why can't we, make that a little bit more, a few years longer?
Thank you, Mrs. Hill. May I address that? That's Arizona State Retirement System, not only for public schools, but also other eligible agencies, including municipalities, as well as Arizona State University, land-grant universities, Maricopa Community Colleges, as an example of some of the employers. And actually, the retirement age is based, depending on when you entered the system, on either a point system, 80 points, or there's another criteria that's even longer for team members who were hired, I believe, after 2011. And so it's not necessarily 55. Someone could have entered the system in their 40s, and they would still have to put in so many years. So it is actually age plus years of service that would trigger the ability to retire. So just to clarify that, thank you.
I understand that, but I do also see that you could start, when you're younger, and then put in your 25 years and get up to age 55, and you could retire with full benefits, is kind of my point. So if you did start early, I'm just saying that we're losing some of our very good teachers that are retiring at a young age. My mother did. She retired when she was 55, and which is great if you can do it, but we're kind of at a point where we need people, all hands on deck, and a lot of them are retiring, pretty quickly now, because it is a little bit tougher right now because of COVID and various things. But we really do need to think of the kids first, right? And so I'm just trying to figure out how we can do this, but if we can't touch the retirement system, I get it, but it would be so nice to give the teachers that do such a good job, I'd love to give them an amazing salary and give them great bonuses and great, levels of pay that are very specific to how they're doing in the classroom. The teachers that aren't, I guess there's just no way to do that. I mean, I would just love to see, not the blanket, but encouraging teachers to really step up and do the best that they can do, and to encourage others to do the same. And then we can pay adequately that way too, and kind of improve our level of academics within the classroom as well. And like I said, I know we are dealing with a lot of issues with finances, but just putting a blanket out there, it doesn't resonate with me. I know that's a very difficult issue to fix, and everybody kind of does it the same way and has always done it, but I guess that's just my 2 cents worth. I think we'll get a better quality teacher in the classroom if we're able to compensate for their skills and for their heart for the job.
Thank you. President Sandoval, Mrs. Hill, members of the governing board. With the Arizona State retirement, if someone does retire, the system does allow them to come back and work for a public school district. And I also do hear feedback as we hire new people, especially if they're new to the system, there is an amount that the employee contributes, and it's close to 12.5%. So it's a double-edged sword. The Arizona State Retirement System is a fantastic benefit for a team member who stays in the system to that point. But for those who are newer, they see it as, oh my gosh, I'm required to contribute to ASRS, and so I'm actually losing X amount. So I just wanted to clarify that the teachers do contribute, as well as all staff, to ASRS as part of that benefit. We do have performance pay that we do have in place with our classroom site fund, $2,800. So there is a performance-based aspect to our certified teachers' compensation that's currently in place.
Yeah, I know all that. I was just trying to figure out, I would like for it all to be performance pay, like they start out at this amount and then, the principal can determine type of a deal, or, a small committee or whatever, which is kind of the way it generally works in, most professions, is it's performance pay, for everything that you get, above and beyond the base. So I understand, I do. And I do know that they put into the system and they do get a lot out of it once they retire. I do understand that. So, but I'm just trying to figure out how to work this so that we can get the best return for our students and our classrooms in our district and our parents, so that we can do the best job we can for our kids, and also compliment the teachers that are phenomenal, because I had them. I know a lot of people did, and I would love to give them more, a lot more, than the teachers that are doing the bare minimum. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Ms. Underhill?
Well, amazing job. I mean, this is like always, you make it make sense to me, and I so appreciate that, because it is incredibly complicated. I do have a few questions just, that kind of came up. So one of them is, with these new dollars, and I know they're never like permanent, but is there any sunset, anything tied to them that would give an indication of like what it's going to look like in the next few years?
Thank you, President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, members of the governing board. The new funding to the base is protected, ongoing, and inflated. Now, of course, future legislative sessions and legislators, I cannot speak to what recommendations will come in the future. I can only speak to, with this new funding that was approved, the increase to the base is protected, ongoing, and inflated. And then, of course, there were additional dollars for the special education weight increases opportunity funding as well. So this was the package that was brought forward, and it's resulting in the increase to our base support level, our funding formula, and hence the infusion of approximately $15.2 million for our 23 budget.
Well, that's excellent. That's good to hear. And in regard to, you were talking about reserves, is there any concern around like rollover? So if we are to reserve funding, is there a penalty? How does that work?
Thank you, President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill. There used to be a cap on the amount you could carry forward. It was 4%. That cap is no longer in place.
Well, that's also good news. Another question that popped up was, you mentioned grants, and specifically the DES grant. Do we have any concern about that one going away?
Thank you. That grant is in place through June 30th, 2023. I will note that we are expecting the minimum wage increase January 1st, and it's based on year-over-year August inflation percentages, and so there could be an increase that's close to $1.80 to $1, because we know June over June inflation was 9.1%. The reason why I'm highlighting that is, even though that grant's going to sunset, we will see movement with our minimum wage employees going up to that new cut point. And then we would have to look at ongoing opportunities for that group. That program, be it community preschool and Kids Zone, is fee-based. It's a cash-controlled activity. The one nice thing is the DES grants that have been in place have supported those programs where we would be able to continue in the near term to honor that increase.
That's great. And I mean, those DES grants have been continuous for quite some time, correct?
Actually, they were a result of the pandemic.
Okay.
So it's new funding.
Okay.
We have in place for many years additional DES grants for community preschool. I think that's what you're referring to with Dr. Pinsky's program. The grants I'm referring to were above and beyond.
Okay,
that.
so we wouldn't see like complete destabilization, but potentially a decrease because it's not recovery funding again?
Correct.
Okay.
What was in place before COVID would remain.
Okay. And then I just had a question in regard to, and it might have been somewhere and I just didn't see it, but we give 7 years. What is our rate per year for staff?
Thank you. President Sandoval, Mrs. Underhill, it's 1%. Now, of course, hard to fill is, I believe, up to 10%. Mrs. Vesley is not with us this evening, so I'll speak to her in general. It's 7%. And Mr. Molino, if we go back to the slide, I believe it's detailed, so I won't be relying on memory. And so it is 7%. Up to 7 years of experience may be granted above the minimum rate, and that's 1% for each year. It's compounding. So you would start at, for instance, 40,114, and then multiply that times 1%, that new amount's then multiplied times 1%. And that's that illustration I had in that subsequent slide showing that compounding over the 7 years. And so in addition to that, an additional 3 years of experience may be granted. Whoop, if you go back, please, Kevin. An additional 3 years of experience may be granted for hard-to-fill areas, for example, math, special education, for a total of 10 years.
Okay. And we put that's on our public statement as well, okay?
Yes.
And is that comparative, is that pretty close to what, like I just have another neighboring salary schedule in front of me here, and it just says straight up, we give, year for year experience may be granted at $800 per year. So, I mean, are we in the ballpark?
We've been making progress, but sometimes it's lagging progress. Our budget team just recently talked about a priority could be to look at the 7 years to bring it up to 10. Again, there's a cost. Every time there's a recommendation for movement, we have to then earmark ongoing funding to cover that progress.
Okay.
But yes, the budget team has talked about revisiting the 7 years of experience.
That's great. And then just the last thing is, I think it's absolutely imperative that we increase our starting salary, and I know that causes all kinds of challenges for everything else. But like I said, I'm looking at a neighboring district's salary schedule from 2021-22, and the starting salary is $47,139, and that was before this. So I guess my other question is just that if they were already there and they are boosting by $8,000 or whatever these districts are doing, so we're still chasing them. Is that correct?
President Sandoval and Mrs. Underhill, we have been making marked progress in recent years to become more competitive. The 48,000 would bring us into a more competitive position at this point in time. Some districts have already made recommendations with the new funding to increase, as I mentioned earlier, to 49,000, 50, 52. We survey our sister districts.
Okay.
Others are still 44, 45. But we know with the scarce population of teachers who are available, there's going to be that competition and that movement. So even if we were to move to 48, we would most likely look at that beginning teacher salary again as the budget team and administration would begin their work for fiscal year 2024. Where this would bear fruit, though, it would help us not only put that increase in place effective July 1st, but would allow us, as we continue to recruit and hire, have a much more competitive salary schedule for certified teachers.
That's great. No, it sounds like we're really pushing ourselves at least into the mid-range, so that's really wonderful. So I think that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Underhill. Ms. Myers, I mean, you mentioned a couple times in your responses to both Ms. Hill and Mrs. Underhill just how the district continues to prioritize people and go in this trajectory of ensuring that our associates have world-class benefits, which includes compensation, right? You know, when we take a look at, it's been said, I mean, our teachers' working environment equates to our students' learning environment. And, I know one of the ways to value and respect all of our associates, yes, compensation for sure, but culture is a big consideration as well. But when we take a look at, as a district or districts across the board, or we'll just focus on Peoria Unified, I mean, when we see teachers and or staff move from our district to another, when we look at those exit interviews, and Dr. Davidson, I know you're in a different role now, we don't have Ms. Vesley here, but I know, a lot of those considerations from a teacher or a staff member is salary, right? And, when we take a look at, trying to move in the direction of making our teachers whole from 2008, right? We still have opportunities there without question. And, one of the things that we need to be careful of in my mind, as we have discussions is when we make comparisons to public financing versus private financing institutions, meaning corporations versus, a public school district. When I take a look at our teachers and what level they may be in the hierarchy of a corporation, those average salaries are $60,000, $80,000. So if we're going to make those comparisons, then we'll increase our teacher salaries to that level as well, right? But that said, I mean, I know that we have opportunities. I know we're moving in the right direction. I do appreciate all the different scenarios. I'm always going to have the question in and around who's at the table when we're making these decisions or mapping these out. So if you don't mind, and this could be in a Friday report, but if we can get a listing of the budget team members again, the committee members, again, Friday report's perfect. I just want to make sure that we always have the right people at the table. I'm certain that we do, but to ensure that the decisions that we make, have input, versus feedback from the individuals who are in the field and whose lives are impacted most, by the decisions that we're making as a district. So I'd appreciate that. But overall, look, we have opportunities, and Ms. Underhill stated, and certainly she concurs that increasing our starting teacher salaries is an important competitive move, and what that means as you do that and how that impacts compression and everything else that you're considering, right? But I don't disagree. I mean, I think bump that up yet again to that $48,000 level, making us competitive as a district. We'll bring in those individuals. Getting them into the door is the first thing, or the first step, right? And typically when someone looks at a job, it's more often than not, it is based on salary. But then once they're here, then the consideration is, from a longevity standpoint and how long they stay within an organization does become about culture and the environment and the work environment, right? And that's where, again, I'm proud of, that trajectory that we're on to ensuring those inspiring work environments for our associates and the trajectory that we're on to really make, in my mind, our educators whole, that we still have some work to do. But I know we're moving in that direction. So, as always, I appreciate the diligence and the very detailed conversations that we have when you present. Not that, the presentations from everyone else weren't as fruitful, but no, I absolutely appreciate the time that you take and really just making sure that we're very informed. And most importantly, the time that you take to make sure that when we consider the monies, that you're always taking a look at anticipating, right, what may be coming around the corner, based on some of the comments that Ms. Underhill made, some of the grants and their ability to sustain, et cetera, and the AEL, et cetera, and those are real considerations. No, thank you for again, the diligence and the conversation and the complete presentation. I really appreciate it.
President Sandoval, if I can just jump in.
Yep.
Before we wrap this up, I very much appreciate some of the feedback that you have provided. One area that I would love to hear your thoughts on is, and I'm not sure that we've touched on those, but our approach that we're using as far as holding some of those resources back to address some of the other areas that we have within our M&O, some of the concerns we have with AEL. So just to hear some of your thoughts on that, if I'm making sense. So if we're talking about 15 million and some of the numbers that we're looking at, or 10 million, 11, right? So as Ms. Myers pointed out, there are options around holding back 25%, 20%, 50%, right? What, as we're working through some of those numbers, just what is your feedback on that approach?
Yeah, I mean, for me, just right now in this discussion, right, and I think there's probably some other discussions that I'd like to have with, other associates throughout the district, but I mean, looking at this in this meeting, and what I said earlier, about our finance team, always being very thoughtful about what may be coming around the corner, and that's important. I know our business services team has always been very, highly decorated, from a finance perspective. We've always had, optimum credit levels and our carryover dollars. I mean, it's just, we are very fiscally responsible with the dollars that we have, while prioritizing our people, right, and moving in that direction. So I do appreciate that. So, I mean, I don't know if that helps, but I think for me, I think this information is great, but, I wouldn't mind the opportunity to also have further discussions with other individuals, throughout the district.
Well, we'll be bringing this back for board action in a week. So just.
Well,
I'm just
so with that said, I mean, look, we have two board members that are absent, right? And I'm certain they'll take a look at this and have a lot of questions. But I mean, what would be the timing on this? I mean, do we have the opportunity to have? This is a great meeting and great discussion, but in light of two board members not being here, if we bumped it one meeting, I mean, does that put the district in a adverse situation from a timing perspective?
It doesn't. We have our budget. We have our budget revisions that we have to meet those timelines, and so that's part of the crunch that we're under. The other issue is each week that goes by, right? It's weeks that we're not getting those dollars into our employees' pockets. I think the point of tonight was to kind of lay a foundation, and we'll work with the board members who are unable to be here. I know that I'm confident that they'll watch the rebroadcast of the live stream and get all the information that Ms. Myers provided. Yeah. It is a priority of ours to try to bring this as quickly as we can, just because we both on the budget revision timelines, but also we do want to honor our employees and use these resources. And if it's the board's will to allocate some of these resources to our employees, then we want to do that as soon as we possibly can.
Agreed. No, 100%. Okay. Yep.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that it's a little tricky because I just don't have a comparison. You know what I mean? So if I want us to be competitive in all areas. So if one of those other areas, admin or certified, is severely lacking, obviously we want to make sure that we're competitive within those ranges. So I guess if we could see like a comparison or kind of some potential scenarios around those pieces, that would be good. But then I also appreciate Ms. Myers' thoughts around having some of that reserve in case we do find ourselves with further shortages so that we could, tinker and adjust our starting salary, whatever levels we need to later on. So Okay, I guess just some scenarios would be, I know we don't have time, but if we had scenarios, that'd be great.
Yeah, we can look to bring back some further information next week when we present to the board just on what this might look like. It is fluid, obviously, as you've seen, like even when we addressed our bus drivers, each time, right, the market adjusts, and then we have to be fluid, and we have to be able to adjust with the market. We are lucky to have a budget team that is willing and committed to putting in the work. They've done an incredible amount of job, a credible job over the last, really the last 12 months since we started this process last October, and have committed great amount of hours in representing their different groups. So we can do our best to get that information to you even prior to the board meeting so that you've got that information to be able to make that. But I did hear your comments around the reserves and making sure that we're in a position to be able to adjust to any concerns that come up.
Thank you. Ms. Hill? Good.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Ms. Myers, and your
Hopefully
entire, it did,
little-
thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
Thank you to Ms. Myers, your entire team, and to the entire budget team as well.
Thank you. All right, moving on to 3.4, ASBA delegate discussion.
All right, President
Is that
Sandoval,
you?
Governing Board, it is me. We had some questions that came up around Arizona school boards and their delegate process, where boards send delegates to the delegate assembly, and they represent the district with in voting in several different areas. We had a request to dive into this a little bit more, get some more information. And so what I'm going to bring to you, we just provided you some background information. But what we did find out is we are on a very, very tight timeline. We've talked about addressing this a couple of times. And my recommendation right now is that we formalize this as part of our January retreat when we select the different officers, and that we not try to hurry this up. We would have to take action by next week in order to have the delegate ready to go. It's been quite some time since we've had a delegate, but I would recommend that we make this part of our January retreat. The board goes through the process. We talk about, right, we are now much better prepared and educated on what this would do. The board selects that as part of the process of the board president, the board clerk, committees, and we select the delegate at that time, and then start the process at the beginning, which then starts in January, and we follow it all the way through so that our delegate is best prepared to represent the district next September at the delegate assembly. We would have to do, it would be a pretty significant lift in the next board meeting to try to accomplish all of that. And so my recommendation is that we formalize this, we work with our governing board agenda, or I'm sorry, our governing board calendar. We put that in as a reminder each year that we address it, and then we make that part of our process in the retreat and our first organization meeting of the year.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I would support that. I mean, this is it's a lot to take on in a short amount of time, and and I definitely want to make sure that every board member has the opportunity to really take a deep dive and be informed and go through all these. I'm assuming these are all different, I'm going to call them measures, if you will, but yeah, that's I mean, I would definitely support kind of starting this process fresh in January at that retreat. Question. Ms. Hill, any thoughts on that? Okay. Ms. Underhill?
No, I agree. I mean, if it's just a matter of sending someone, it'd be different, but it's not. So yeah, I concur.
Great. Okay.
All right, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
No, thank you. All right. If no further questions, comments on 3.4 ASBA delegate discussion, we will move to adjournment. I do need a motion to adjourn this meeting at 7:14 p.m.
I move to adjourn.
Second?
Ms. Contra, we have a motion by Ms. Hill and a second by Mrs. Underhill. Aye.
Sorry, President Sandoval.
Aye.
Mrs. Underhill?
Aye.
Mrs. Hill?
Aye.
All right, motion passes, 4 yeas, 2 absent. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I really appreciate it. Mrs. Underhill, Mrs. Hill, thank you.